Hello and welcome back to Ride Rescue. Well, I've got a lot of work that I'm hoping I can get done with this old backhoe. So I need to get started in, well, doing some wiring and some brakes and steering, a few other things. So in order to remove this console, dash, whatever it is, I need to disconnect the battery so that I can disconnect these wires and not arc and spark and catch fire. At one point in the life of this backhoe, somebody had removed the dash, and most likely they removed it because the brake system was such a mess. Well, they broke off all the bolts, and they didn't bother replacing them, and they just kind of set it in place. Bounces around and gets a little beat up. Really, the only thing that's holding it in place is gravity and a handful of wires. And most of the wires aren't even going anywhere. So I'm just going to pull everything out and then figure out what essential wires I do need and then hook everything back up. There's some breaks in the fiberglass. It looks like somebody tried to pry the cover off of it and hot wire it, and they busted the fiberglass up pretty bad. So that'll be a project too that I'll have to do before I can put it all back together. Speedometer cable wasn't hooked up. That explains it. The forward and reverse shifter is really sloppy. So I definitely want to take that off and tighten that up. It's got a pin that's driven through it that's just all worn out. It just goes to show it's got a lot of hours on it. Now that I have that cluster out, you can see the nastiness of the brakes. Typically I would take these apart and rebuild them. I'm hoping I can do that once I get them apart and get them all cleaned up. We'll see what the bores look like. If the bores are clean, just get a kit and rebuild them. These go for about $200 a piece. I've seen them as low as $100. Rebuild kits are 20-30 bucks. I definitely want to go that route. Where that's leaking, dripping, that's the steering that I need to tear apart. So I got to take this steering column apart. Wish me luck. So the guy I bought this backhoe from said that he was told that if this steering shaft was full of hydraulic fluid, then that meant that the pump needs to be rebuilt. And that would be the cause for the slipping when you're trying to turn under a load. It was clear full of fluid. It just came pouring out of there. There was probably a good 2 quarts of fluid in there. So definitely a problem. There's the culprit. I started to remove the hoses, but there's 4. Yeah, no, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 hoses going into that little beast. So rather than taking all those hoses off and trying to mark them and figure out where they go, I'm going to look into a rebuild kit for this, and then I can rebuild it here. But these I've been noticing online, they run about $800 to $1,000. I found one for 400 bucks. The kit is roughly $100. So I'm thinking, just for simplicity, and I probably don't have all the tools to completely rebuild this thing anyways, I'll just swap it out. 400 bucks. If I can get that one, that's worth it. You can see that is all torn apart now, and where the brake system was, there's the brake system. So this master cylinder is worthless. It does absolutely nothing. This one, there's something going on that's weird that I can't figure out, but it keeps locking up the one wheel and it won't release. Now there is a lockup solenoid, little switch on the floor. There were several of them actually, these little deals, and there was a couple of them on the master cylinder, one on each. I'm just hoping that was getting all thrown off with the pedals, but I don't know. I'll just have to see when I put this all back together. If that one side is still locking up, then there's something more to this confusion. But so far it's come along. Got a lot of wires that are hanging that don't go anywhere. I've got a red one that looks suspicious that's just hanging. It's a pretty good size gauge too, so those are the kind that can cause fires if it's hooked to the battery, and who knows what it went to. This is the dash out of the backhoe. Rather than just cleaning this up and possibly painting it and putting it back in, I just wanted to show you, somebody really wanted to get into this. It has a locking cover and somebody had been trying to pry it open. There's another break in the fiberglass right here, and then as you can see from the gauges, so obviously I need to clean this up so that I know what lights up in there. We got a temp gauge. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. That looks like a battery of some sort. So one of these is fuel. I definitely need to clean that up. So I'll start by just taking everything off that I can. It has a piece that I guess was to stop it from rattling, or maybe so you didn't catch yourself and cut yourself on these sharp edges. I have a piece of upholstery finish welting left over from a project, and it is a pretty good match to that, so I'll use this. Well, that should be fairly easy to straighten out, smoothen up, sand it all down, and paint it semi-gloss black again. The hinge is broken on this where they tried to force it. I don't think I really need to weld that though. I could weld that back up, but I don't think that's really necessary. It definitely needs a lot of straightening. The back side of these gauges have several of the little light pieces that you can twist them and pull them out typically. There we go. They're all really dirty, and there's a bunch of them that are missing. So I don't know if they're just accessories that didn't require them or what the deal is, but I need to check all of those. One fastener missing. All three are different. I like things to be standardized, so I will replace all these with similar screws so that they all match. This one's broken out. So when I fiberglass this piece in, I'll fiberglass over these ends and drill a new hole so I can save this piece, because other than that, it's in good shape. These switches are fairly inexpensive, and none of these were wired, so I'm going to have to find the wires that would have made all of these work. But emergency flashers, lights, signals, all of those have been removed from the backhoe. So I will have to add all of that back on the backhoe if I do want to make any of these work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fiberglass over all of these holes, and then I can just start new, fresh, if I want to add lights and things back onto the backhoe. With what I'm planning on doing with it, I don't need any of the lights. But when it comes to resale of the backhoe down the road, it'd be nice to be able to have all of those functions. Alright, I gotta go to the hardware store and get me some fiberglass. Some resin. And we'll doctor this up. Use a little body filler to fill over all these holes. And it's got some pretty good breaks in it. But it's salvageable. Just notice this. Thought that was pretty interesting. It says, caution, do not use DOT3 brake fluid. Well, the brake fluid that is in the toolbox on top of the console, there's a toolbox that's welded up there, it's DOT. He's been putting DOT in there, and this warning says that these will fail if you use DOT3, and this one failed, and this one is failing. Huh, wonder what happened. This says Dexron 2 fluid or Case Tech oil. Now, Dexron 2 is transmission fluid. If these are set up for transmission fluid or hydraulic fluid, then yes, they will fail. Let's see, a couple hammers, some vice grips, some vise. Yeah, I can straighten these out and get these so that they will close up and lock again, and then that'll help protect the dash, and especially protect anybody from trying to hot wire and steal my old beast. As you can see, I've been doing a lot of work trying to save this dash panel. The dash panel has had a rough life. It's broken across the middle, pretty good crack, piece missing here. The inside of this, there was cracks all over in here, so I used some fiberglass to reinforce all the back side of it. And there was a big piece missing right here, so I actually used some fiberglass layers, created a form with a cardboard box, and I was able to just keep layering in and layering in fiberglass, run it out long on each edge, and then just trim that off. So now I've got a good solid piece that fills that in, and then I use some auto body filler to smoothen all that out. The top of this, being exposed to the elements, sun and weather, it had lost all of its top coat, and it was exposed fiberglass. It was fibrous. You'd rub your hand across it, it was stickery. You get that fiberglass in your skin. So I sanded that down, and then I used a coating of the resin for the fiberglass, put a thin coating on this, sanded it all smooth, and then I put filler, body filler on top of that to flatten it all out. Because it had some crevices, again, more cracks. So that was a good way to reinforce and put all this piece back together. I had a break here in each corner, so I fixed those breaks. All the knobs that were used and holes that were left for knobs that weren't used, it created a weak spot. So there was cracks in a lot of these holes. And then there were holes that were just unsightly. They just didn't look good. No reason to have all those. And so while I was fiberglassing all the cracks,
I fiberglassed across the back side of all these holes and then just filled them, eliminated them. So now it's just going to be a nice clean panel. Left the hole for the key switch, and that's really the only one I need. For some reason, somebody along the way set up a push to start on this panel. So the push to start button was here. Turn the key on. It has the start. It'll turn over, but it wasn't wired to keep the connection for the ignition so that when the starter turned over, the ignition would kick on, you'd release it, and it would stay running. So you put it in the ignition mode here, push the start button, and it would run. Well, it just needed to be wired. Somebody went through a lot of work and a whole lot of wiring to do this, and then left a big huge spool mass of wire and tucked it in and zip tied it on. So I got to clean that up anyways. And then there was a wire that was on the back of this that's a hot wire that's exposed. That needs to be cleaned up too. That needs to be covered, connected, cut off, whatever I need to do, find out what that wire was intended for and get rid of it. So I finally have this all prepped and ready. I'm going to use a automotive type primer, a primer surfacer, prime it all, and then I can sand it all smooth. It'll fill all the little cracks, all the sanding marks, and then I'll be able to paint it. This had a texture to it. It was like a vinyl texture, naga hide, whatever you want to call that, leathery look. So I'm going to use a hammer paint. It gives you a hammer finish. It's a light texture. I tried using a bed liner type spray. I sprayed the covers for this with that. I didn't like the way that turned out. I tested this piece. It's the filler panel that goes in the bottom with this hammer paint. Looks great. So I'm excited with how that turns out. So we'll spray this too. And then I've got all the components. There's two levers. There's a throttle lever and there's a shift lever. All those pieces all put this back together. They were all rusty and grimy and covered with grit. So I've been cleaning those all up. I'll get those painted too. Get this primed, wet sanded, and painted, and I can start piecing all this back together. There's a lot of parts to all of this. And then the gauge cluster, the plastic on the face of the gauge cluster, it's all discolored. It's like the headlights on cars when they film over and they get that yellow tannish film and you can't see through them very well. You couldn't see through these gauges at all. Hand polished those gauges, cleaned it all up, painted it, and I'll show you that.